Thank you very much for calling me in this important debate. And I do want to thank the Honourable Lady, my friend, the member for North Arran and Ayrshire, for securing this important and very timely debate. I think it's absolutely essential that we keep this issue on the agenda. It affects every single constituency, not as many constituents as the member for the Isle of Wight, but nevertheless 4,542 women in Easington are affected by this change, and I owe it to them to keep fighting until the government gives them the justice they deserve. I want to mention, Mr Bourne, if you'll forgive me, my late constituent Val Roberts, who I'd referred to before, who was a determined campaigner in the interests of the WASPI woman who I mentioned in a previous debate. She was left with no alternative but to sell her home and to move into private rented accommodation. So sadly, Valerie passed away, and I think it's caused me to redouble my determination to see that others receive their due state pension. We've debated this issue many times in the Chamber, Mr Bourne, and indeed here in the Westminster Hall, and I pay tribute to the WASPI women for their incredibly active campaign over the years, and particularly over the last few months. Early day motion 63, which was signed by 196 members of this House, honourable and right honourable members, including members from the government side, notably the member for Worthing West, but also the member for Weir Valley, the member for Glasgow South West, and numerous others who've been pushing forward the campaign, and indeed the member for Strangford as well. And we had an e-petition which was laid before Parliament that attracted well over 100,000 signatures, and the support for the campaign continues to grow. Indeed, my recollection is a Westminster Hall debate that was held here was so oversubscribed, and I believe this one would have been today were it not for the statement on Brexit. Members were actually sitting on the window ledges, those who are here will recall. Yes. So it's a live political issue, and it's one that's not going to go away. We've heard there are... I'd give way to my honourable friend.
Honourable friend. And would he agree that part of the reason WASPI women are so frustrated is the government will just not engage with it? It's about time that they had a proper discussion, not expecting them to just give the money over, but a proper discussion with the representatives of WASPI to see if there is a way forward. At the moment, there doesn't appear to be, and that is the government's fault. Would he agree?
Graham Morris.
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't have put that better myself, and I am hoping that the minister's going to come up with some positive solutions and answers to address this terrible injustice. We've heard that 3.8 million women are affected, and many of whom are going to be driven into poverty and into reliance on food banks. It's quite a disgrace in one of the wealthiest nations on earth. And although the report from Philip Aston, the United Nations expert, hasn't been greeted with enormous acclaim by the ministers from the Department of Work and Pensions, I do think we should look at what the man says. And he's been talking to various campaign groups, including the Women Against State Pension Inequality. And he says that certain women, including the WASPI group, have been affected disproportionately by recent changes in policy, in particular in relation to pension age changes. And indeed, Philip Alston's report, his statement on extreme poverty and human rights in the UK, showed the number of pensioners living in poverty in the UK had risen by 300,000. That's up 16% in the 4 years to 2016-17. And that's despite assurances from the government that measures such as the triple lock guarantee would ensure that pension of poverty was a thing of the past. I know I mentioned it earlier in an intervention, but I do think it's a very important point, and I hope the Minister is going to address it. That isn't just the variations in life expectancy, because ministers keep telling us, well, people are living longer, and in order to make pensions affordable, that there has to be adjustments to the state retirement age. There are huge regional variations in life expectancy, but there's also huge regional variations in the amount of time that a retired person can expect to live a healthy and active lifestyle. And I think that should be factored into the government's calculations. I'll give way to my honourable friend and then to my honourable friend and comrade here.
I thank my honourable friend and neighbour for giving way. On the point of regions, would you agree with me that 2, 3, 4 times the number of WASPI women who are in this room are actually outside of this room, and it's a great tribute for them to come up to Westminster, and it's a great shame, as the Chair has remarked earlier, that we couldn't have had a bigger venue to accommodate them.
Absolutely. I mean, I thank my honourable friend for that contribution, and I applaud the campaigners who have doubtedly pressed the case and put pressure on members of Parliament to come up with solutions. And I also salute my honourable friend, who I know is addressing a meeting in his own constituency on Saturday on this very issue. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, but surely it's not just life expectancy we should be considering. There is also work-life expectancy, which I would suggest is different, in that in many cases women do physically taxing work, and there is a huge difference between what someone can expect to be performing in their working life as opposed to their life.
Morris.
I think that's a very relevant point, and I hope the Minister and his advisers are noting these contributions, because this should all be factored into the calculation. And, you know, when we're talking about poverty, women are particularly affected by poverty, as reductions in social care services translate to increased burdens on primary caregivers. You know, most often, disproportionately so, that burden falls upon women. And indeed, various reports have indicated that, not least a report last year from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation warned that 500,000 more people would be living in poverty if the government maintained its existing benefits freeze. Now, the government has got room for manoeuvre. It does have some flexibility, and indeed it could have used the windfall to end the benefits freeze a year earlier than planned, but instead chose to change income tax thresholds in a way that will help those better off and do nothing to help those in greatest need and in poverty. Austerity, it's clear to me, could easily have spared the poor from its worst effects if the political will had existed to do that. But there are things the Minister and the Government can do immediately. We are unnecessarily creating a generation of women in which many are being forced to rely on food banks, some are being forced to sell their homes and to rely on the benefit system. That's degrading for women who've worked all their lives, often in very demanding occupations. But what the Minister could do today, he could announce that the winter fuel allowance, which can be worth up to £300, is going to be paid immediately. If he's looking for suggestions as to what would make an immediate start, if the government were to give the WASPI women that level of payment, they would at least be able to have some level of comfort during the cold winter weather. Many in my region, the North East, are going to have to choose between heating and eating. And we really must recognise the injustice faced by these women, because there have been so many missed opportunities to put the position right. I've got no doubt, and many members have referred to it, the 2011 Pensions Act accelerated those changes. The former Pensions Minister, Steve Webb, is extensively quoted, and he said that he wrote to the WASPI women on behalf of the coalition. He not only, this was following those changes, he not only informed them about the change in pension change of 1 year set out in the 2011 Act, but informed them, many of them for the first time, about an earlier change, meaning that some women's state pension retirement age was actually being extended by 6 years. So I was incredibly disappointed that the budget didn't offer any form of help or relief for the WASPI women. And I would like to acknowledge that some Conservative members did make representations to the Chancellor in all sincerity, and I was disappointed that neither the Chancellor nor the Prime Minister responded sympathetically to them. I understand that the Prime Minister herself is a WASPI woman, And I'd be curious to know from the Minister to find out whether she actually received notification from the Department of Work and Pensions about the changes in her pension. That the government must understand this is a time-sensitive issue, and has been said, you know, we are willing to work cross-party to find a solution. If the government are unable to do so, they're going to be letting down a whole generation of women who are being denied a fair deal on their state pension. In my constituency, 4,500 women are affected, but the campaign is looking for justice, not just for warm words.
Yeah.